So welcome to our extraordinary Hawke's Bay Regional Council meeting today on the 30th of March. Just a warm welcome to you all, and can we please start with our karakia? So please join in. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga. Kia mā kina kina ki uta, kia mā tara tara ki tai. E hia ki ana te ātakura, he tio, he huka, he hauhu, ti hei mauri ora. Kia ora tātou. We have recommendations for this to be a public excluded meeting. Can I please have governance provide a summary as to why we're going into public excluded, and then we will move if we agree to do so. Thank you.
I could do that. Kia ora, councillors. So we have recommended that it's in PE due to the modelling, the maps, and the ability to, the maps will go down into a individual property basis. So we are suggesting that we go in PE for that reason, and the impact that that could potentially have on property values for those scheme footprints.
Thank you, Desiree. Are there any questions?
Testing that out, Chair, so the decision we make will have that impact. So why is there a period of an hour and a half or 2 hours in which that impact is not available to the public?
So the modelling that we've done, and that we do want to be able to delve deeper than even the modelling, if you want to go there.
Right.
So that's why we've proposed that it's in PE.
Councillor Cooter? Just
elaborate a little more on that. You're saying that we could make decisions today asking for greater modelling and in-depth analysis, and therefore that could influence or affect individual property owners. Is that what you're saying?
So no, we wouldn't do more modelling, but we would. So, for example, the footprint for Whirinaki, we would actually be able to show you the properties within the footprint, so it does identify individual properties. So we'd be able to bring up a map and show you, okay, that property there is in the footprint for modelling purposes, and so you may choose to move. We want to be able to have the flexibility to change the model today during the meeting.
Ready? Could I maybe have Nick or Chris just confirm the level of decision making in today's item, and where the information we endorse goes next, so that it is more publicly available?
So I'm happy to start on that, and then maybe Nick can chip in. But any decisions today are really to set up for consultation. So we're not striking a rate or making any final determinations today. We're simply going through a wide range of options, and these options are quite extreme in terms of their range. And so we want to have that free and frank discussion to understand the impact, and there may be some questions at a property level, but remembering what we're trying to do is stick to the principles to come up with a model for consultation in parallel with our LTP, at which point all the appropriate options and their costs will be readily seen, and people will be able to comment on. So this is really the start of the process, but to be able to have that free and frank discussion around the rating impost on some of these communities and the different models that we may be able to apply or not.
Through you, Chair, elected members could consider at the end of the discussion debate on putting the paper back into the public arena once you've gone through the process where individual properties might be identifiable during the debate. That doesn't stop council putting the paper and your decisions into the public arena post the debate.
Okay, and are there any further comments or questions of clarity?
Yes.
Yes, Councillor Williams.
I think we leaped too quickly into public excluded. I think if we are going to drill down into modelling at any stage, we could go into public excluded at that point. Free and frank discussion, as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, is not a ground for a public excluded meeting. It is a ground for withholding information under section 7, but I have heard Leanne say to us it's not a ground for going into public excluded for a meeting. I think this is an important issue for our communities. We've been criticised so often for suddenly popping up like moles with decisions and allegedly going out to consultation and then being told it's a fait accompli. So I'm not persuaded that we should go into public excluded myself.
There is an option to stay in public, and at the stage that we need to model properties that are sensitive, we can then move into public excluded on those parts. That helps relieve that proposition.
Yeah, I'd endorse that.
Yeah.
A comment in terms of some of the apps and things.
I just check with the staff that can happen. Absolutely.
The public will not have seen the paper itself, which could be, it's the base document, isn't it? That's all.
Right, so we're going to stay in public included right now,
As an open meeting.
an open meeting? Yes. All right.
Through you, Chair. Peter, just confirming that those maps actually are attachments to the agenda. So is there anything in the agenda maps that would be sensitive?
Well, we could resolve, I think, to keep the maps and the modelling and table 1 would be my other recommendation, that we keep those like redacted or out of the public arena.
Yep,
I'd be happy with that.
okay.
Yep.
So there is one table that has previously been PE and should remain in PE under commercial sensitivity.
Is this the table 1 that you're
Yep.
describing?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
So I would recommend that we keep table 1, the modelling and the maps in PE. And when we publish the report, we could redact those or just not include the attachments.
Right. Okay.
And I think if we do want to delve deeper into the footprints, we might go into PE at that stage.
Okay.
Dancing around.
Can we do that, Peter? Is that going to?
Well, it's possible. The decision could be made to now, is there anything sensitive in this paper that we couldn't put that up on the public arena now if people are looking at it?
The table
Yes, we've just been through that.
We've been to.
So, yeah, okay. There's a
Yeah.
table in this. I thought you meant it was a separate item.
No, there's
Okay, then we can't put it in.
So I think we would publish it after the meeting.
Publish it.
Yeah.
Is it because these ones are not?
All right, are we comfortable with that course of action for this meeting? Okay. Do you need a resolution on what's redacted, or it's just noted?
Well, I guess when we get to the sections that we want to, we might have to move into public excluded at
Yes,
that time.
absolutely. But can I have a resolution just to be clear that sensitive information such as table 1, the maps and the modelling are redacted for public consumption of this meeting? Can I have a mover?
Yeah, I'm happy to
Councillor
move that.
Williams, and a seconder, Councillor Roadley, thank you. All those who agree say aye.
Aye.
Those against, carried, thank you. So if we could move in, actually apologies. I have Tanya Hopman's as apology, Councillor Lambert, Councillor Van Dyke and Councillor Sears as apologies.
Hawke, I see.
He's supposed to join online.
He was online a few minutes ago and we lost contact with him. We were expecting him to turn up.
I'm happy to move those apologies. Councillor Foley, second. All those that agree say aye. Aye. Those against, carried. Thank you. I think it's time that we can move into this item, funding for Category 2 flood
We
mitigation.
need to do the conflicts of interest and last minutes if we can too, please.
Oh, absolutely. I've missed a sheet. Sorry,
we
Peter.
go.
I
Thank
think it's
you.
on the other agenda.
Yeah. Yeah.
Apologies. Any conflict of interest declarations to be made?
No, because it's not a workshop, it's a special meeting.
No. None. Confirmation of the minutes from our last council meeting held on the 28th of February. Are there any corrections to be made? There are none. Can I please have a mover, Councillor Harding and Councillor McIntosh? All those who agree say aye.
Aye.
Those against, carried. Thank you. Okay, right, Nick, would you like to introduce the paper with the team? We'll go
I
through.
think elected members, the team, obviously Chris Dolly is going to lead you through the paper today as our GM for assets, and support from Desi as our strategy manager, and the finance team via Vanessa, via Jess and Susie. So really, this paper is in advance of the LTP, and as you know, Council has agreed a funding package with central government of nearly $250 million. That covers a number of Category 2 flood areas around the region, all the way from Wairoa to Porongaho. With the exception of Wairoa, which is 100% funded by the Crown, all the other locations and the potential works have a split between a local share and the Crown share that is roughly 25% for the regional council. So the decision really ahead is how will council rate for the local share of those packages, and Chris will take you through the detail of that in a second. Any decisions resulting from today will likely need to be included in the LTP as a consultation item, particularly if they're substantively different to existing revenue and finance. And with that, Madam Chair, I'll
Thank you, Nick.
hand to Chris.
Good coverage of the high-level issues there. The council has already agreed to fund its share. Last year, I think in August, a paper was brought to council, and as Nick said, that's for most of these locations, that 25%. So what we're talking about is how we specifically rate for that 25%. Up to today, in terms of the modelling in the LTP, it's been shown as a general rate item. And today really is to go through the detail, because for all of our defined schemes, typically we have a targeted rate model where the beneficiaries of the schemes would contribute the lion's share to those scheme costs. And so it's an opportunity to work through the issues, whether that approach is appropriate or whether a different approach is appropriate. We've done a raft of analysis and modelling. Now, it's important to know that this analysis and modelling has been done at a high level for the purposes of comparison and options assessment. It has not been done to strike the rate, so that further detailed work is required, particularly about the mapping of direct and non-direct beneficiaries. Some more detailed mapping is required to optimise that. So we really want to focus on the big picture, the principles of what we want to work to, rather than any particular outliers. Now, we can talk about outliers, but I think what we're suggesting is that they shouldn't be the basis of making decisions. We should be sticking to the principles, and we can guide you through those. There's often a big discussion around affordability, and we are in a unique set of circumstances because of the land categorisation model. If an area is deemed unaffordable in terms of funding flood mitigations, the next option for that location is it becomes Category 3. Because it's already been determined through the land category process, there is a risk to life that these interventions will mitigate. So without those interventions, that risk to life remains, and the financial model for Category 3 is likely to be more expensive for ratepayers and different sets of ratepayers in different locations than some of these interventions. So again, just a reminder, we've got that backstop to the discussion. So what we really want to do is have a bit of a discussion at the high level to work through what the options are. We've got a lot of the maps and analysis of different rates for different locations available to put up on the screen, so we can sort of guide through the discussion. We have made a recommendation, which is really a starting point. We thought it would be useful to at least, rather than present a whole raft of information, to at least present a starting point. And that recommendation is really about following our existing revenue and finance policy where we can, but where there's obvious affordability issues deviating from that model. So that's a starting point that we really present to commence the discussion. Obviously, from here, any decision is not striking the rate or the final decision. It simply allows us to go to consultation with a recommended position, in which normally the other options, other possible options, are also put forward to the community for their feedback. So that's probably it. I don't think I've forgotten any major issues there. So it's really just launching into a bit of a discussion. We've got the whole team here. We'll answer as many of the detailed questions as we can. We can put the slides up as we go through the discussion, but really over to you, Chair, to guide that discussion.
Thank you. Thanks, team. We do have maps here, and we have many tables. I think it might be quite useful that we go through those so we understand what we're talking about in the discussion. And I realise they'll be on the screen. We have the papers here, and therefore will come up on
Yeah, so we don't
live
want,
stream. Okay.
no, okay. So you want these maps on public domain?
No, we said they won't be.
Okay, so
on
now we
public
need
domain.
to say, this is the section we're going to move into PE. Okay.
Is everyone comfortable with that?
Chair,
Councillor Harding?
just a question about process around, general questions about the paper, or will we take those once we go into
Yes,
the
please. I think we should go into some of the evidence provided so we get an understanding there to inform our discussion.
Okay,
And then
no, I
general
was thinking about
discussion
the sort of
items.
high-level questions at the moment, but that's fine.
Okay, so can I have a mover and a seconder to go into public excluded?
I'll move
Thank you,
it.
Councillor Harding and Councillor McIntosh. All those agree, say aye.
Aye.
Those against, carried. Thank you. So just to start us off, Chris, if you can just share with us a summary of the Crown infrastructure process to eventually strike a rate through the LTP. That's probably worth sharing, and then just carrying on through the paper and into recommendations.
Okay, so just to summarise, I guess part of the reason we're wanting to have this discussion and provide some certainty about our rating options is we will shortly be submitting business cases through the Crown Infrastructure Partners, who's the administrator of our Crown funding for the $250 million program. So one of the things we want to be able to do in those business cases is to articulate how the Regional Council intends to fund its 25% share in most of those locations. So that's why we're bringing it to the table to try and make some decisions on what the options are, to consult with the community and to make a decision as aligned with our LTP. And so it's about managing that risk in those business cases, having certainty in how the Regional Council intends to rate their share. So I guess what happens with that Crown Infrastructure business case, it's effectively reviewed by the Crown Infrastructure team, and then there's a ministerial sign-off on that business case, which releases the funds to enable our project to occur. For the more complex projects, there's a two-stage business case process, and for the simpler ones, there's a single-stage business case process, and we're still working through some of the detail around which projects fall into which category. So that's why we believe it's important that the council has already decided to contribute their share. So that's roughly 44 million. 15 million to that $247 or $48 million package. And so this decision is really or any decisions out of today is really to inform any consultation with the LTP to find a position for each one of these. And so the information we've laid out is normally for our schemes. We have a targeted rate. We have a targeted rate approach where the beneficiaries of those schemes contribute the most to both the capital and the operations and maintenance of those schemes. Remembering, of course, that the Wairoa scheme is fully funded from a capital perspective, and we're only looking at the O&M. So that's, I guess, what we're trying to achieve. What we've done is set out some modelling for different options and opportunities for different areas. We've commented on affordability for some of those communities, and how application of the existing revenue and finance policy may not be suitable, and really it's up to a discussion to work through the pros and cons.
Thank you for that, Chris. Susie, I might get you to add in here the difference between 20 and 30 years worth of borrowing for what we're discussing in terms of capital and operational costs for these schemes.
Yeah, so what we have had it in the paper is just for acknowledgement and full transparency around the differences in a 20-year versus a 30-year repayment. Generally in HBRC and across other councils, we have a infrastructure strategy where generally we will fund capital expenditure like this over a 20-year period. So 20 years is normal. In the past, 15 years ago, 10 years ago at HBRC, it was actually 10 years. But that's certainly 20 years is quite normal for a repayment period for capital spend of this nature. 20 years reflects that intergenerational benefit and repayment over a period of time such that it really spans intergenerational, knowing that these stock banks and generally will last probably, 20, 30, 40, 50 years anyway. In normal circumstances. So the table just outlines a 30-year, whilst there is a small decrease each year per each ratepayer in terms of repayments, ultimately over a 30-year period, there is a significant extra cost over that large amount. So when you're comparing and looking, we find a 20-year repayment really balances that sort of risk reward for our ratepayers comparative to a sort of a 10-year. 30-year is long. 30-year repayment cycle would probably expose us from future sort of resilience from a balance sheet point of view. Just in the terms of if there was a further event and any further major capital expenditure, we would want to probably have that capacity available. So from a council officer's point of view, the recommendation is a 20-year repayment period.
Thank you, Susie. I think everyone here that's, looked after a home loan knows what interest feels like and the long tail of that. I think we'll stop for some questions now from what Chris has shared with us and Susie before we head to Desiree to work us through the recommendations. Is that okay, Spy? Okay. Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chair. Look, a couple of questions. Firstly, the issue of direct and indirect. Can you just, I see a recommendation, for example, for Whirinaki, there's 199 rateable properties, 199 are indirect and 37 are direct. How, in engineering and, I guess, financial terms, has that split been made, and what does it mean for people in each camp?
Thank you. So the first comment I would make is this modelling and the definition of the direct and indirect spatial areas has been done for the purposes of modelling and decision making, not specifically for striking rates. So they are approximate, and it would be fair to say that some further detail needs to be applied on the edges. So they shouldn't be read as the definitive area. Direct is about those properties that would enjoy the direct benefit. So in many of these locations, these would be the properties that were flooded during Cyclone Gabriel, or through the analysis it could be determined could be flooded if the event was slightly different. So that's generally physically determined by the characteristics of the land and the event. So those people are directly, their property is directly being protected up to the level of service provided. The indirect benefit is the benefit that the wider community would enjoy from having access to the community because the road has been protected, no interruption to electricity because substations are protected. So it's the broader benefits to the community that have been delivered through the intervention.
When you say community there, Chris, do you mean the local community?
Yep. So the local community. So if we just go through all the contributions because it gets a bit tricky, we're talking about the 25% contribution to these projects from the regional council.
I understand that.
Then when we talk about targeted rate 70-30, that 70% is the beneficiaries, which include both the direct and the indirect beneficiaries fund that 70%. Then the 30% is funded from all general ratepayers across the region.
But I guess my question is, you just said the indirect, the community that benefits from road access, etc., that would be the indirect within the 70, who are the local community that benefit more than the public generally of our communities of Hawke's Bay. That's what you're talking about?
That's correct.
Okay. Just, sorry, one last question, Chair. From the CEO, my understanding is that we would be making decisions to consult on these proposals here today, that we're not making decisions that this is going to happen. This is a decision to consult on these proposals. Is that right?
Yep, that's correct. That'll happen via the LTP.
And so at that, if there are any properties that when they receive this proposal, they'd be able to test specific rate impacts on them with the staff and give us feedback in that process. Would that be right?
Yes. So I'll let so generally we do some modelling, but we'll let the team here respond to that.
Part of the LTP will have a rates lookup tool,
Right.
and it'll specify different rates that they have, what they currently pay, and then what is proposed to be with part of the LTP, so they would be able to see that exact rate, what it's proposed as.
And able to turn this thing off and so comparative to everything else and just looking at this.
Yep.
Thank
they'd be
you.
able to
Thank you,
see
Chair.
it.
Thank you. Great questions. I've got Councillor McIntosh, then Councillor Curtin. McIntosh. Thank you.
Chair, I'll pick up your analogy of mortgage, and if I look at one of the options we're looking at between 20 years and 30 years, average 20-year payback is $14 per ratepayer. Average 20-year payback is $11 per ratepayer, but you're paying for the extra 10 years. So, I mean, we always get letters from our bank saying pay your mortgage off faster, you know. And so if you use this analogy, I'm wondering if we shouldn't consider a shorter payback period, say 15 years, and test the appetite for that versus what we've got here. But I'm interested to get your views on that.
Yes, Susie.
Sorry, can you just repeat that question? Sorry.
Should we be looking at a 15-year payback as well, given the differential doesn't seem that great, and if we can swallow that, then actually we're all a lot better off, the ratepayers and the council.
Yes, there are benefits in what you've just said for over a 15-year, and we can model that. I just don't have that detail in front of me to be able to share that with you, but I understand what you're saying, yeah.
Would you like to add?
Oh, sorry, yeah.
Thanks, Jess.
The only other thing I'd probably add to that is the considerations for the lifetime use of the asset. So it's just about where you want to spread that cost of capital on those particular assets, because they're much longer lifespan than 15 or 20 years even. So just weighing that up as well.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Thank you.
Yep.
Councillor Curtin.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I just want some clarity around 2 points, and if I could take you to the table 1, is that able to be considered now, or are we excluding that?
It's going to be redacted from the agenda.
I'll make a general inquiry about it.
Yes,
what I'm wanting to understand is the difference between category 2 activity or action, and I'm taking it the proposal's all about category 2 areas, but in the table it talks about general works, which included rapid repair. I get that. I see that as being category 2. But then we talk drainage pumps, repairs required, and then scheme reviews. So there's 33 million involved in that component. Are we clear that that's category 2, or is it something else?
Yes, I can have a response to that. So the pump stations, so what we identified post-Gabriel is that 3 of our pump stations were effectively written off because they were flooded over their roofs and were non-operational for a period. So part of the building back, we intended on replacing those pump stations, and it was an opportunity for the Crown to contribute to that replacement. So it's fantastic to see that recognised in our agreement with the Crown. So they are reflective to drainage schemes, so they are not relevant to a land categorisation process. So it's not like those pump stations are instrumental in moving a community from one land category to another. So they're not tied up with the category 2 type process. And so the pump stations of interest is the Pakawhai pump station, which is obviously easy to get confused with land categorisation because Pakawhai is part category 3, part category 2. But these drainage pump stations effectively are draining the land so they can be used for horticulture and also living on. The 2 other pump stations is at Aotearoa, which is the Mission and the Brookfields pump stations. So there, and I think it discusses it in the paper, the current policy for drainage schemes, I think, is a 90-10 split, and we have relatively small numbers of ratepayers in those communities, and particularly if you think of Aotearoa, yes, it's got an industrial strip, which one of the pump stations mainly looks after, but the Brookfields pump station looks after more of that rural environment. We've got some large property holdings, but small numbers of ratepayers. And so then when we look at how we would recover for each of those pump stations, nominally $2.5 million, when we spread that across the rating base, it had some affordability issues. And so the recommendation was to general rate that work in recognition it was as a result of Cyclone Gabriel.
I'll just go back to where I started, was they are included in the scheme. That is the quantum for Category 2 recovery is, and they are included.
So in terms of our Crown contract, they are part of
even though they may not directly impact on Category 2 categorisation.
That's correct, and we've been quite clear with the Crown, and a number of these locations aren't like telemetry, for example, isn't linked in, and the scheme reviews.
I'm not arguing, I'm just trying to get clarity. The other aspect of this is, are there any Category 2 properties in the Awatoto Miani zone?
I don't think there are, no. No, so there's no Category 2 property. There were Category 2 properties post-cyclone, and when we undertook the rapid repair, those areas around Miani that were flooded went back to Category 1 from memory. So they're currently in Category 1, and we won't be taking any properties backwards through that process.
Okay. If I could just follow through, Madam Chair, on the paper at paragraph 12, and this is where I really am struggling to understand what's been written. Ignoring the 20 and 30 year difference, we've got a 70-30, four different rating splits: 70-30, 70-30 and 90-10 for pump stations, 50-50 and 100% general rate. I'm struggling to understand what that means.
So the purpose of doing that, so what we did here is we modelled a raft of scenarios to provide line of sight as to how applying those different scenarios to the rating framework would result in rates for the public. So that's at the moment we're not saying we would follow the recommendation. I guess says that we should follow certain options in certain locations, but this wide-ranging modelling was done so everyone could understand the impact of different rating scenarios.
I think the question is, you've got so many split rating options there.
Yeah.
So were all of them investigated, all 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 options?
So I think they were, yes. So
Four options under 20 years and 4 options under 30 years. So I think you might be asking about the 90-10 per pump stations?
Well, so 70-30, you've got option 1 is 70-30, option 2 is 50-50, and option 3 is 100, is that correct? That's setting aside pump stations. So there are 3 options, 50-50, 70-30 and 100. That's right. 3. Direct, indirect. So applying.
Combined. Direct and indirect in the modelling are combined.
It's one. Okay.
Yeah.
There's no, I think there's some confusion about what that looks like. And then we just sort of step aside and have the pump stations, the choices for pump station rate setting are either 70-30 and 90-10. So there are 2 options there. Is that right?
So for pump stations, there's 4, because currently for the pump station, the drainage, we actually have it at 90-10 in our current RNF. And so we said, what if we retain that exact same rating?
It's 4 options for everything.
Yeah. Please, someone knows what they're doing, because I have.
Do you want us to articulate those 4 options, Chair?
Yes, please.
yeah, so really it was about articulating because we'd have different revenue and financing policy approaches to different types of schemes. The three key options, even though the table looks really complicated, the intent was we would model the finance and revenue policy position. So for flood control schemes, that's 70-30. For drainage schemes, it's 90-10. So there's a different approach in the existing policy. Then to assist councillors in decision-making, particularly around affordability issues, we went to a mid-ground, which was approximately 50-50, so 50 targeted rate, 50 general rate. And then if there were further affordability issues, we could go all the way to 100% general rate. So what we're trying to articulate is follow the revenue and finance policy, a bit of a middle ground, and 100% general rate option to facilitate some discussion.
So just a bit of clarity, so the first number is targeted, the second, so the 70 is targeted, 30 is general?
That's correct. So when you see a 70-30 or the 90-10, the first number is the targeted rate, which consists of both the direct and indirect components, and then the second number is the general rate component.
Okay. Councillor Harding.
Kia ora, Chair. Look, I've got three questions. One on consultation we can deal with right at the end, I think. Two questions I'd like to deal with now. Firstly, just to round out this question about how the targeted portion of these is split. We have differentials proposed in some cases. Can Chris just explain how we go about determining those differentials and what our assumptions are at the moment, please?
So I'll let the rating team go through that.
So what we assumed is that we would use the same methodology we do with Heritonga Plains. So right now, what we do is we take the targeted rate and we split it 70-30. Same way. And so we go 70% direct, 30% indirect. And so we use that exact same methodology in all of our models.
Thank you. Yep. We can test that assumption later on, I'm sure. Okay, so my other question was a broader question of looking at the table 1 in the paper just below paragraph 11, and that reflects the overall funding envelope for all of this activity and individual funding envelopes for the individual schemes. Now, it looks to me the same or very, very similar to other stuff that we have seen in committee in the past. So is it the same? Is that individual apportionment maintained right through from the original back of the cigarette packet? And how is that, are we still okay within that funding envelope and the way it has been assigned? Are there tensions that we're not seeing, or are the problems we're not seeing, or is that original work that we have done flowed right through and we're still comfortable with our funding envelope, please?
So the table there is the same table that was presented in August last year, so the table hasn't changed. The table cannot change because it's locked into our contract with the Crown, and there's no entertainment to change the table. So is there tension? There is definitely tension. Our contract does not allow for escalation, and if you do some broad sums, escalation can cost us $2 million a month. So the longer we take to move through the process on executing this work, the more risk we have around the numbers. So it's not a risk-free environment where we're comfortably well within. It's going to be a real challenge for the team to deliver, and each one of these numbers has different risks associated with it. So we're working with Crown Infrastructure Partners around how we address some of that, and that's precisely why we created the Program Management Office and are resourcing that up as fast as physically possible, is so we can run. We are currently running all of these projects in parallel because of the importance of getting on the ground, getting the diggers on the ground and doing the work, and not being subject to further escalation, which we all know is quite significant at the moment.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you. Councillor Roadley.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I was after Mike, is that all right? Thank you. Chris, could I just get you to do some general korero around Well, actually, firstly, the table 33, so I understand that we're talking about the capital costs and how they'll be shared, and very appreciative of the Crown funding agreement. That means that Wairua has no capital cost. But in table 33, have we moved into maintenance? So there's zero capital, and then that maintenance is on the, sorry, I can actually see it now, 70/30. Looking at the direct and indirect for Wairoa, could you just talk about, we've discussed with or heard from our community that there's a real affordability issue, and could you talk about if, looking at that table, will that table be in public? Yep. So if those are anticipated rates increases for our community, what are the impacts of not having to pay that rate? So for commercial industrial not being fronted with an approximately $84 increase, what would be the consequences of not paying that rate?
So quite a tricky question. I think there's different parts to that question. So the first is, I guess, recognition that there's no capital contribution from the community or from the regional council for this particular project. It's 100% Crown funded.
So we're only, just to clarify, we're only talking about ongoing maintenance.
So this table here only talks about the operations and the maintenance. And depending on the final solution, because there's 3 viable solutions that are being discussed with the community at the moment, they might have different operating and maintenance regimes. So what we've done here is estimate what we think it will be. So they're not exact numbers. So the risk, I guess there's 2 scenarios. One is if we're unable to fund the maintenance, should we be building the infrastructure in the first place, is a question. And I think this is the best deal I think Wairua will ever have in terms of improving the resilience of the community. Effectively, a $70 million of injection of capital into that community to improve resilience. The maintenance costs are fairly low in comparison to the repayments on that capital. I guess the other one is, should infrastructure be built but then is not maintained? And from a standpoint of a professional organisation building infrastructure which it would not maintain, I think that would be a difficult pill to swallow. And there would be no guarantee of the performance of that infrastructure because it hasn't been maintained. And it's just like if you were given a car and you never serviced it, then the maker of the vehicle would probably not honour the warranty because you didn't change the oil at 10,000 kilometres or something like that. And maintenance is an important activity to ensure that this infrastructure is resilient and does the job it's supposed to do. So there's other options about how that maintenance could be funded. But I guess in terms of the recommendation, we certainly felt that those relatively lower maintenance costs for the improvement in resilience were value for money.
Absolutely, and I totally agree with you. Just circling back to the consequences of not putting that infrastructure in, what would happen to our Category 2 properties if we did not build that flood protection?
So under the land categorisation framework, which of course was developed by government, and the implementation in Hawke's Bay was led by the Regional Council. Under that framework, Wairua is currently a 2A, which means there's a level of uncertainty. If we didn't proceed down the 2C back to 1 path, it would revert to a Category 3. And so,
can you refresh our minds what Category 3 is?
So Category 3 is determined to be an intolerable risk to life, where we'd be recommending that people don't live in that location. And there's a voluntary buyout in the other areas where that has occurred, being Napier and Hastings. There's a voluntary buyout process that's supported by the Crown. So that's where, and under those models, 50% of that is funded by the local council, be it in Hastings or Napier in the Heretaunga example, and 50% is funded by the Crown. So that's what the framework informs us about the pathways from a Category 2A.
Thank you. And could you just reiterate, for the properties that are indirect recipients of the protection, they would have a targeted rate as indirect. Could you just talk about who is captured in the indirect and what is the benefit that they will receive?
Yeah. So the current modelling that we've done for the purposes of discussion and any consultation really draws the direct around really that North Clyde area, so the area that was directly impacted by the flooding. And then indirect picks up most of the rest of Wairoa, just in very general terms. And the indirect is about saying there's benefits for the community by having a more resilient community, the fact that you can utilise roads, you can utilise businesses, some of those lifeline utilities are protected, and so there's some overall benefits for the community, and it's really sharing the burden of maintaining that resilience across a wider community to those who are directly receiving a benefit.
And one more point of clarification. What we're talking about is only protection from the river flooding, so we're not talking about potential flooding from other causes, i.e. drainage, the bar, tsunami, other things.
That's right. So, so this particular project is around flooding from the river, where it hops out and goes through that North Clyde area. Our drainage schemes are built to a different level of service and are not designed. They're designed to drain land slowly over time, and have lower service levels around the 1 in 5 year level of service. And recently we've been doing a lot of work looking at those drainage schemes for any minor improvements and some enhanced maintenance. But the bottom line is those schemes are simply not designed to deal with low frequency significant events. They're there to deal with the day-to-day type rainfall events.
Thank you. Chair, can I have one more other question completely off topic but still on the paper, or are we going to move into the other numbers later?
Go ahead, Councillor Rowe.
Thank you. I just wanted
to finish it off.
Thank you. Para 41 and 42 talks to the telemetry, and I just had noted that we are under the SWIRLA under fossil, we're getting some cash to cover the telemetry upgrade and the getting that information out to people who need to know. And yet we've still got, so the $5 million share is the Regional Council share of that. Could you just clarify that, particularly 42?
So 42, so we talk about telemetry, so there's a $5 million allocation for telemetry upgrades, and then our share of that is roughly 25%. And then what we're talking about here under the existing finance and revenue policy, that telemetry activity is 100% general rate funded. So our recommendation was to continue that. It's appropriate, and so our recommendation was to rate in accordance with our policy, which is general rate.
Of the 25%
For the
25%,
25%, yeah.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rowley. Little Mike.
For the most part, Councillor Rowley's covered my question, but I think just on your last point there, Chris, basically what I'm reading in regards to the modelling, we're basically following existing policy in regards to the recommendations that are coming forward from officers. So we're kind of seeing that as business as usual? So
that's correct. We do have a finance and revenue policy where I think great effort has been worked through over the decades and more recently over the last 18 months. We thought that we should try and follow that policy where appropriate, but obviously we're pointing out there's a couple of areas where there's some affordability issues where perhaps different approaches are required. So what we've tried to do is follow the policy where we can, and that's the basis of the recommendation, but ultimately decisions lie at this table.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Foley.
Thank you, Chair. So we often look at all these opportunities in isolation, and the upcoming LTP is where the rubber hits the road, so to speak, when it's all brought together. And my first question is, in the paper it talks about the timing of this spread across 4 years, and we're only doing a 3-year LTP. So how will we convey this? Like, is there going to be some missing information? Because presumably we're not going to build all this infrastructure in year one and start paying for it. Is there going to be some missing information in the consultation in that year 4 when it's really all up and running and operating? I'm sorry, I'm not sure who to...
There's two aspects to your question, Councillor Foley. There's the actual when we're going to incur the spend, and actually when we're then going to rate for that to reimburse ourselves for the loan and the lending that we take out. So factually accurate, yes, we are spending over the next 4 years, and the LTP only goes for 3. So the community need to be well aware that that we will spend up to $44 million in the next 4 years. We need to start rating for that in the coming year, in the first year of the LTP, to repay the principal and interest on any lending that we take. What we've tried to model here for awareness is what does if we were going to rate over a 20-year period or a 30-year period, what does that look like over a repayment? But it's an LTP choice of yours if we want to repay over 15 years or sooner, right? So what we're trying to do at the moment is, in principle, work through a 20-year program which council officers have recommended, which is a normal lifespan of what we see as an intergenerational asset, 20 years. So, yeah, I get what you're trying to disclose, and what we're trying to do is let the community know this is a 4-year spend. We will need to start rating for this in year 1, and that will likely continue for 20 years to reimburse those amounts that we incur, which will be $44 million.
Great, okay, thanks. Chair, second question. That rates look up, Vanessa, great that that's going to be available to ratepayers, I'm sure. Obviously, a targeted rate will be really easy to see. It's either there or it's not as a comparison to what they pay now. What about all the things we keep lumping into general? You know, they'll see an increase in their general rates, but are they going to be able to see the breakdown of why that's different?
They won't be able to see a breakdown, but we are going to put some terminology and extra information down below to hopefully explain some of it.
Okay, thank you. And just last question, please, Chair. Just a question that just high level around insurance. Do we have any contact with the insurance industry about if we build this infrastructure and the ratepayer then incurs a certain amount of rates, will there be a direct benefit in terms of their insurance, either affordability or just insurability?
Thank you,
Like, have a
Councillor.
crack at that.
Look, I will have a crack at that, as you say. Some of that question is easy to answer, parts of it are difficult, and I probably won't be able to answer. But the first part of the question, are we in contact with insurers and Insurance Council? So we have, I think, probably 6 weekly meetings with the Insurance Council where we brief them, up-to-date briefing of where we are at with all of our recovery actions from the cyclone. And the reason that's important is because then they can act on knowledge rather than not knowing. And the feedback we get from the Insurance Council is that knowledge is invaluable because it enables them to make informed decisions, and where they don't have information, they just price or withdraw accordingly. So it is actually beneficial for them to have that information. Certainly, in our discussions with the Crown Infrastructure partners who are the administrators of the contract, is we understand that part of that business case process is to discuss insurance outcomes of these interventions. But I think that's quite problematic in that it will be difficult for the insurance industry to be definitive around whether they will insure a location or not. It is very important to the business case for any flood resilience interventions that the built environment and investment behind those interventions is insurable. So that's a core part of that business case. You could argue if you cannot insure behind infrastructure that provides resilience, then what's the point of providing that infrastructure? Will there be a direct correlation between premiums and infrastructure? I can't answer that. The Insurance Council will say every insurance company acts independently, assesses their own risks and has their own appetite for risks. What the Insurance Council has said and what's on their website is that Category 2C areas will continue to be insured, and part of our approach in moving communities back to one is we are not waiting for that infrastructure to be completely built to signal that move when those key tests around certainty of the funding, which is those business cases being signed off, and importantly an interest in the land so that we know we can actually access the land to build and maintain the intervention, and that we have a good robust solution in place. Once those tests are met, we're signalling that the category goes back to one. And so the reason we've done that is to signal to banks and insurance that we're well on the path, and to inform them that that's where we're heading. But, you know, is someone going to save $100 on their premium? I can't answer that question.
Thank you for that background, Chris. Councillor McIntosh and then Councillor Curtin.
Yes, Chair, just a comment / question in terms of the timeframe we use to repay. So we've discussed 20 years and 30 years, and 20 years is appropriate because that is roughly the lifetime of the assets that we're talking about. Nevertheless, the cost between, say, 20 years and 30 years is not that significant, and so strongly err towards a 20-year timeframe. However, it would be interesting to look at 15 years as well, because although there is an increased cost in that, actually the cost is quite small, but the benefit is quite big. So it's just something I would like to see considered.
Yeah, absolutely. And Susie, do we have another opportunity where you can provide that data so that we're reassured that we're looking at the right timelines of loan repayment?
Yeah, we can. And would you mind if I just responded quickly? Sure. Just so what we try to do is balance intergenerational activity, and it is up to us to balance that sort of intergenerational equity on who pays and where that spreads. So 15 years, certainly we can provide those numbers, but what we're trying to do is find a balance between that sort of intergenerational equity of who shares that repayment. So yeah, so 20 years is sort of industry average norm around sort of council infrastructure, but certainly we can provide that.
Great, thank you. We do have a resolution that looks at 20 years though today, so just consider that when we get to decisions. Councillor Curtin.
Yes, just I'd like to follow on from Councillor Foley's inquiry around, essentially the question is, can we differentiate the general rate? Can we identify a component of it being flood recovery? Or alternatively, is there scope, I think, as we did last time, to assign that portion, in this case the Category 2 spend, that's applying to we are saying applies to general rate, can we in fact rate differently? That is, apply flood recovery component instead of the general rate. So either differentiate the general rate or apply a different rate.
Desiree, would you like to answer the ability to differentiate the differentials and where we can use them. I think that's a good start, including the general rate.
Yeah, so the approach that we've taken to date is it's a general rate applied consistently. So we have that principle is quite strong through our rates review. I would need to look into the technical aspects of how you can apply it. But if your principle was to apply it across the whole region, you could have a targeted rate that's applied either uniformly or with a differential across the whole region, like our economic development rate.
Yeah, so where I'm coming to with this is that Councillor Foley is intimated, is that we've got all of these different strands now affecting our general rate. Transparency and the ability to explain to the public what that's about. Is it possible to either differentiate within the general rate so that when it shows up on your rate demand,
It's got its own line.
it's got its own line, but it's a general rate recovery, general sort of thing.
Yeah.
That differentiate, is that possible, number one? Alternatively, can we describe this application of the general rate to, and I think I heard you say it then becomes a targeted rate, universally applied. So, so we add complexity on complexity.
I think the easiest option would be a separate targeted rate applied across the whole region, and then you would choose whether you did that on capital value or...
Not the question. The question was, can you identify it on my tax invoice, on my rate invoice?
Yes, as a separate targeted rate would be the easiest way to do it. I think you can't have a separate line in the general rate.
No, you can't.
No, it would have to be a separate targeted rate. It would be called like Cat 2 flood mitigation, and then you would decide how you apply it. So, yeah.
Thank you for that. I'm just looking at the recommendations, which are all described as being general rate. So we somewhat lock ourselves into that methodology if we adopt the recommendations today.
Yeah, and so where you're heading with that is an identifier of a targeted rate for recovery category 2 works that will be spread across the whole region.
Can you have a targeted rate for the whole region?
Yep.
Yeah, we
But
did
it's
it.
targeted to the work, not to
Yeah, it's targeted to the work.
Yeah.
Yep. So it's more of an identifier on the rates bill. Yes, I could.
Sorry to throw that in.
No.
That would be.
That's a good
30%.
consideration. Okay.
I lost it.
That would-
Number.
Oh, okay, for the 30.
Okay. Councillor Harding.
Kia ora, Chair. Look, getting towards the bottom of the paper, we talk about consultation,
Yes.
specifically in relation to these cost-sharing proposals. So paragraph 65 talks about to use the LTP as the vehicle to consult. If you go to the recommendation 5 talks about it being concurrent, which is two slightly different things. The key point, I think, is just what the level of information and separation from all the other detail of our long-term plan consultation we try to achieve. This is a pretty meaty subject, and ideally, whilst it is deeply embedded, it's one of the core activities in our LTP. It's a pretty crunchy thing in itself, and so I think everyone would benefit from it having its own, sub part. If the intention is to roll out completely embedded in our LTP consultation, then there's a risk, two risks. One is that people lose it in the detail of that, and the other risk is that we displace other things that we ought to consult on just because of the complexities of consulting on too many things. So I'm just interested to make sure that we have good clarity and whether we're actually talking about two separate concurrent consultations or just one large one. And I think we learned from the revenue and financing policy, this risk about mixing up a lot of changes and how people get lost and all that. So can we have more guidance on that, please?
Nick, would you like to respond first,
In my
please?
view, through you, Chair, that this is an LTP issue, so it's about, it's central to how much you're going to rate over the next few years. So should be embedded in your LTP consultation, but needs to be, as the Councillor Harding said, given its due prominence as an issue. So that would be my advice. I think to run something separately around this will probably be more confusing to people than including it. Noting that any of this is all going to be dependent on the business cases for all these Category 2 areas actually eventuating.
Desiree, would you like to add to that?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I agree with Nick on that point. It would have its own part. Well, I think it's a part of our consultation document. So we use the consultation document as the tool to widely disperse it. And when I say concurrent, I mean that it's a change to the revenue financing policy. So it is concurrent, but it is embedded in the LTP. And that's what we've done. We did it 3 years ago. We run fees and charges schedule. We run the revenue and financing policy. It's just, it's quite a technical term, concurrent, but it means embedded and done at the same time.
Thank you.
Okay, does that clarify?
Yes, it
Thank
does.
you. Good question, though. If there are no further questions, if we head to the recommendations and we work through these, recommendation 1 and 2 seems quite straightforward. So I'm happy to move, and can I have a seconder for those two, please? Councillor Roadley, thank you. All those who agree say aye.
Aye.
Those against, carried. If we look at table 3, and remember, there's still a bit of work to do here. We're at a principled level. We're trying to stay consistent with our revenue financing policy, but we also need to recognise 2 outlier areas that I think are most significant in this discussion. So, Wairoa, are there any other propositions to the Wairoa line? Comfortable, okay. If we move through to Whirinaki Industrial, knowing that there's further outlier work to be done and bring back to us, given the industrial areas and their situations. Okay, we're comfortable there. Okay, moving over to Whirinaki Other. So that is the 198 properties, excluding the horticultural. Yes, Councillor Williams.
Yeah, Chair, this is the one where I'm not sure that I'm comfortable with 70-30, and I'm wavering towards the Parongaho
Yes.
affordability concern.
Yes.
I quite appreciate that Hawke's Bay will never have a deal this good again. I doubt New Zealand will ever have a deal this good again.
Agreed.
And so we're talking about our communities paying some share of 25%. And if we don't do this, equally there's a bigger burden on the ratepayer because they become Category 3 and become something they half a buyout. It's Hastings. But, I'm wavering between, I'm thinking about equally, these people have had a hell of a time. And is there a better affordability between, say, an average of 384 for Whirinaki Other, which should be close to what the direct people pay, and 537 at 70-30. So I'm a little bit stuck on that and undecided. And is it too much of a wrinkle in our long-term plan to put both options for Whirinaki Other? Or if we put 70-30, I imagine that people would come back and say, no, it should be 50-50 anyway. I mean, I guess my comments become a question.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's the one part of this where I got a little bit stuck.
Yeah, and understandably. Can I just suggest a thought of the capital funding for Whirinaki other to be in line with what Parongaho has proposed and what obviously Wairoa has, which is 100% general rate capital. And if you look at the maintenance of that, it would bring both the capital and maintenance costs for those other Whirinaki ratepayers down. I mean, that's a consideration.
Hold on a second, Chair. Right. So, yes, I suppose that's a more subtle way to do it. So as a general point, if we went out with 70-30, does that mean we can still arrive at some other split, like 50-50, or 70-30 on maintenance and 50-50 or 100 or something on capital?
At a principled level, so hopefully to help with councillors' questions, I think if you look across all of the works being proposed, there are 3 places in the region that have, through no fault of their own, but because of the cyclone, got new schemes being constructed for largely residential areas, Wairoa, Whirinaki, Parongaho there, that aren't attached to an existing scheme.
Yes.
So all of the Heretaunga ones are attached to an existing scheme. So if you think about it at a principle level, I think there would be an argument that you could consider that for all of those that are new, that are not attached to an existing scheme, not industrial, then you could look to go for 100% general rate for the capital, and then potentially just keep your split for your ongoing maintenance as per your policy. You can always come back to look at your maintenance again, once these schemes have been constructed. So I think there's an argument there that can be mounted at a kind of a principled level that binds Parongaho, Wairoa and Whirinaki other together.
I probably wouldn't have gone that far, but I do understand from a principle level why you might.
Just a question or a bit of clarity, Madam Chair. So, Nick, in regards to the damage, the breaches that happened to existing flood stock banks that were repaired, where were the costs targeted for those? Did they go back to the ratepayers who were directly covered within those schemes?
I'll hand that one to Chris.
Yeah, so if you're referring to the rapid repair program immediately after, so they were funded from a combination of insurance, and we're still working through the insurance, scheme reserves, disaster reserves, and the existing scheme has funded those. So and then I think in terms of the insurance gap, we're still working through that, and we may not know, for quite a few months yet exactly what the outcome of that process is.
So we had a group that had, if you like, existing protection.
Yep.
And as such coverage.
Yep.
Versus a group that had no protection, felt the full effects of the cyclone, and now are going to have to contend with, if they want to remain in the area, they're going to need protection, and it's a matter of how's it all paid for.
Yeah. So all of our existing schemes, the infrastructure is insured. So if it's damaged, we claim insurance. There's typically a disaster reserve because of the nature of the infrastructure. And then there's also other funding within that scheme that can be rediverted or prioritised. So you're right that existing schemes have several ways to fund repairs, whereas if there's no scheme, we have to come up, it's new money. Yep.
Kia ora.
Okay, are there any other flags there for the Whirinaki other? No, so if we move down to the Heretaunga Plains, it is
We've approved this scenario.
at the 100% general rate for capital.
Okay.
Right, Chair, I didn't think we'd approved anything. We were just going through and having a conversation.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, but that
Before we
is, sorry, a
decide.
suggestion. We haven't moved anything yet.
No, yeah.
No.
Changing the recommended to 100% general rate for capital. That's what, this we're just.
I think we're just having a conversation there
Yeah.
at the moment.
Okay.
So if you can have them both there,
Yeah,
and we
yeah.
will resolve as we go
Thank you.
through. The Heretaunga Plains, are there any issues with that status quo situation? We're adding to an existing scheme? No. Whangaho, it's suggested here 100% general rate for the capital build and a status quo operation and maintenance as all other schemes. Okay, are there any other suggestions there of a different targeted rate?
I think it's worth noting that there's a difference between Wairoa because it's Crown funded. So because it's Crown funded 100%, we're not asking the question about its funding. On the Ho, we're saying on a affordability basis that it is, we're having deep sympathies around it. But for Whirinaki Other, I'm scratching my head to say, is it a principled decision based on those other two decisions to conclude it? I'm not convinced that that's the case.
Okay.
Well, Chair, an option for Parongaho is the one you suggested with 100% general for the capital and 70-30 for the O&M. Anyway,
That's what's
in that way you,
that's
right.
what's suggested.
Oh, it is.
What I'm asking is, based on our table, which is where I've gone back to around affordability per
Got you.
group of ratepayer, sorry, and I am referring to table attached to 33. Right, so that's where you can see where the affordability, it can be compared against, say, Heretaunga flood schemes, right? And there's a capital column, so you need to add that plus the maintenance of what's suggested in the resolution. And then you start to see the real outliers, hence why Whirinaki Other, you look at the capital for the rural and residential plus the maintenance, gives you your yearly rate.
Except for Parongaho, we don't add the capital, correct? Because for them as a targeted ratepayer.
That's the recommendation.
Yeah.
That's what it would be under 70-30.
Yes.
Yeah.
For capital as well. Yeah.
Okay, so back to Parongaho, which I do think is, there is an issue there with the operation and maintenance split and affordability. If it was to be kept at 70 targeted, 30 general, there are some red flags there. So what I'm suggesting is, Desiree, what may be a mechanism to look at affordability with the 70 targeted rate of Parongaho.
So one option is to go to 50-50 modelled, or the other bookend would be 100% general rate, or somewhere in between.
So there's two parts there. We're basically asking you, Madam Chair. One is actually about the establishment of the stock bank, and then one is the maintenance.
Yes,
once
absolutely.
Once it's established. I'll go to the maintenance one first. How useful would a stock bank be if it's not maintained?
Yeah, that's not, I suppose that's a given.
Yes.
And we're talking about the contribution of a targeted rate to the maintenance.
So therefore, the rest of our stock banks, they do have a fee that's already, if you like, set in place. So what you're asking for is that special consideration be given to this particular stock bank regards to perhaps it's affordability. Who's to say that those other stock banks are actually affordable in regards to their maintenance?
Well, we do have some general figures in 33 to help guide us on that, but there's no exact science to that. Which is why principally we need to think about where we sit on these splits.
Chair, can I be clear, you're putting on the table 100% general rate for the O&M for Parongaho alongside the capital as well? Because of the O&M cost that's concerning you?
That's one bookend.
Yeah.
The other bookend
Could be 50-50.
could be 50-50.
Thank you.
Or status quo, which is the other end.
Yeah.
Does our emissions policy come into play, given the small number of...
Could I have a go at that one? The remission policy, how long can you keep asking for remission for the same thing? I suppose.
I mean, they are designed to be a temporary hardship, so you wouldn't get a repeated sundry
We are
remission.
talking affordability. That's the logic of the discussion.
Yeah.
And to be more refined with around affordability, if you're an outlier outside the policy, then your ability to pay comes into focus. So my question is really, is there, if we stuck with the policy as is there sufficient leeway and capacity in remissions to deal with that affordability issue?
I think so. It would be something we'd look at if that's the decision that you guys went.
Councillor Harding.
Chair, I just wonder whether we're getting a little bit too tied up in the thought that we're actually making decisions today as opposed to, about the ultimate outcome, as opposed to decisions on a basis for consultation. I think it's clear that there's some challenging, particularly your Parongaho, your Whirinaki, they're spitting out some challenging numbers. We have to start somewhere, but we just want to ensure that we do a proper job of consulting through the LTP, but also the way we structure the LTP gives us flexibility to make decisions based on that, including, and we range from 100% general rate funded to 100% targeted, arguably. So provided we structure our consultation, okay, I think we're reasonably safe to land with the staff recommendation at the moment. But I think we've clearly signalled that there's a bit more work to do around affordability in a couple of areas.
So I think you're right in going out to propose in the consultation document. I think what we need to guide is what bookends we'd like them to be able to put in there. So we're giving them guides. We've seen 2 outliers that we're concerned about. Now, what do we want them to propose in terms of options?
Yep.
So I think that's what they're seeking from us.
I think that's right.
Today's decision.
Procedurally, because if we don't put the bookend into the consultation document, we're pretty much locked into our existing RFP.
Yeah.
So if we are going to do something different in the RFP, we need to consult on it. Would that be pretty much the gist of it?
Yes.
Yeah, I'd like to move for Whirinaki that we consult on a 50-50 for capital. And for Parongaho, we consult on a 50-50 for operation and maintenance. But other than that, table. That would give us some bookends to fall back to.
Yep. Very pragmatic.
So just for clarity, you mean there are for those 2 areas, there are 2 options. There's the table and there's the alternative.
Well, we could fall back to the RFP, which is 70-30 in both cases. I'm setting a bookend to do a departure for both, what I'm suggesting.
Through you, Chair, I think what the consultation document would say would be council is proposing 50-50. There are 1 or 2 other options, the 70-30 or the 2 bookends, but council goes out with one of them as a proposed recommended.
So I'm basically saying the table with 2 variations. One is 50-50 capital Parongaho and 50-50 maintenance. 50-50 capital Whirinaki and 50-50 maintenance Parongaho, otherwise as per the table.
Councillor Rodley?
contrary to what you're saying, councillor Williams, I actually think for the proposal, we should stick with this 30/70 for Parongaho O&M. However, having it quite clear what the other options are so that they are real choices, not just people have to think them up. I just think it would be easier because it's not just the Parongaho people who have to wrap their head around this, it's all ratepayers of the region. And so that would be very quick for, and understandable for ratepayers to go, well, why is that one different from the Wairoa or the Whirinaki? I think if we stick with this is the plan, but these are options, and be really clear about what those options are. I think that was one of the missing parts in our last consultation. We didn't give them what the options were, and I'm not suggesting A, B or C, but leaving the ratepayer who's busy doing their own thing to have to dream up what that other option might be, I think is too big a ask.
I think we have to go out on a preferred though, when we give options.
Well, what's there is what our policy states, so I think we would be prudent to stick with what our policy has already said, but with the alternate that we can.
Well, that's the thing, if we can't, if we don't put it in as an option in our consultation document, we won't have anything to fall back on.
Correct, but if we put it in as an option, but not the preferred option is the policy, here are these other options.
Right, so I'd be quite happy to put as a second option,
Yeah,
like option
that's
B, the two things that I said, if you wanted to make the preferred option
Policy.
the table,
Yeah.
I'd be very happy to give us scope to make what I've just suggested the second option.
Is that possible, Desi?
Yes, yes.
And that would keep it.
Chair, I'm just seeing two distinct steps here. One is adopting this as our approach, and then the second one is when we discuss our consultation document, what are the options that we would we would apply to there. So I think we're talking the same language. However, step one is to land on what our current position is.
Because, through you, Chair, we did discuss with Whirinaki Industrial a different percentage there also, didn't we? So that could be an option when we get to the policy.
That's right.
To the document.
To the document.
A heavier weighting in the industrial.
Yes, Mitch?
Through you, Chair, you might want, because there's still a lot of stress in all of those communities, you might want to signal somewhere in your recommendation the options you're considering through the LTP, because this paper will otherwise gets taken as read, and it'll get missed, if you see what I mean, in the LTPs to come by some, and so I just wonder if there's something that signals that you're looking at those options as well, just to keep communities who are concerned about how much they're going to have to pay aware of that.
I agree with you, Nick. There is a table that clearly we have to work off in terms of the impact and affordability. And so when we go out to preferred consultation and these types of numbers are provided, they are looking from us a direction that we have considered affordability very seriously through this meeting, but also through our consultation documents. So I believe it would be remiss of us to address, at least to a principled position of signalling affordability based on the numbers we have here today. So what I'm saying is, it is a good option to say our preferred would be a 50-50, acknowledging that we know it is a serious outlier. But as our policy states, this is the status quo in the other option.
Maybe, Chair, we better get to the stage of putting some motions and we can test them, because there's going to be an inverse there. So could I put a motion, Chair?
Just Councillor Hokianga, and then we'll go to motions. Hilda. Kate Boy? Okay, before we do that, please, we have general works. We haven't moved through the table fully yet. General Works, there are no concerns with what's proposed there? There are not. So if we can please just deal with table 3. And councillor Williams, would you like to propose any changes or additions to the table?
Well, item 3 is essentially to agree, subject to consultation, on the funding sources as proposed in that table as option A, and with option B as less preferred, 50-50 for Whirinaki other capital, and 50-50 for Parongaho operation and maintenance.
Can I have a seconder for that? Councillor Harding, would you like to speak any further?
Well, look, I think we've been round, not quite in circles, but it's a complex issue, and I just think that would set up, on a principle basis, the default position, I'm persuaded, is in line with our policy, but give scope for our communities who are concerned about the affordability issues, for those two communities in particular, which, given my motion is driven from an affordability concern, would mean we could take that into account through the submission process.
Thank you. Councillor Harding?
I think Councillor Williams has said it all. Thank you.
Fantastic. Any other speakers? Councillor Curtin?
I'm just a little worried about the process here. I totally get where it's coming from. However, I'm seeing two distinct processes, as mentioned before, and that the opportunity to pose those alternate options, 50-50, it could be 100%, here are those other options. And I think we ought to leave that consideration to the adoption of our plan for consultation, as opposed to setting it now. So essentially what I think we ought to do here is to establish what our preferred position is and leave the consideration for other options to our next phase, which is the consultation plan itself. So I'm afraid I won't support that.
Any other speakers? Councillor McIntosh?
Chair, I understood that we were simply signalling at this point that we wanted those other options in the consultation document. I don't, it doesn't preclude us, I don't think, from having further comment on that document when it comes about, but we're just wanting to send quite a strong signal in the direction that we're putting forward now.
Okay, no, we don't have to answer. We're in deliberations. Okay. Any other speakers? There are none. Okay.
Just in reply to
Yes.
Councillor Curtin's point, I think the reason I'm putting that so squarely now is to give the staff some direction in the lead up to preparing that consultation document, knowing that when we get to that stage, we can obviously revisit that, but that's why I'll put the motion now, to give that direction to staff.
Thank you. Okay, all those who agree with the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those against? No. Councillor Curtin, noted. Thank you. Carried. We move on to item number 4. Agrees to the term of the loan for Category 2 flood mitigation schemes will be 20 years, aligning with the current practice.
Happy to move, Madam Chair.
Would you like to move? Can I have a seconder? Thank you. Would you like to speak to that? No?
Yeah, just briefly, I'd say, look, I acknowledge Jock's point and his concern. I think that staff have advised us well on 20 years as being probably the happiest compromise and the best match between affordability and the life of the asset. I'm not sure whether we can accommodate. I'd like to accommodate Councillor McIntosh in some way. And perhaps the opportunity is to signal this is our preferred solution, but an alternative we can also consult on the alternative to 15 years.
Any other speakers?
Which I think I've just moved to amend that resolution, so where that leaves us.
Oh, no, well, it sits where it is now, so any other discussion? Not
Yes.
discussion.
Yes,
Your
I
points?
would just, staff have given us a good response. However, I would endorse Councillor Harding's amendment.
I think we're still speaking to motion though, and someone else can amend that if they want to.
Well, we've got this on the table, moved by yourself, and you're happy to move as is?
Yeah.
Yes.
Test that.
And we've had a seconder. Any other speakers? All those who agree, say aye.
Aye.
Against?
No, I'm all good.
And then we move to 5, agrees to consult on the proposed amendments to the revenue and finance policy concurrent with the LTP. Be clear here. Happy to move,
Happy to
Councillor
move,
Harding. Councillor Curtin second. Any speakers?
Just to make a point, if I around, and it goes to paragraph 65 of the paper, and it talks there about consultation will be open for 4 weeks, supported by direct mail out for all ratepayers, media releases, social media, Facebook Live and drop-in sessions. I wonder whether we can, when we are talking about consultation and our different channels for doing it, we do include council engagement with their respective communities. And I make that comment given the feedback we've got from our consultation on the rating policies, etc., particularly land value, capital value, is that there's an assumption that consultation is only about a written submission made on the day, and we tally those up, and that's the outcome. We need to move away and make it quite clear to the public that consultation is a much more significant process than that, and it involves a number of channels, and is not particularly constrained by someone writing a written submission.
Yeah. So I take from that you'd like to amend that to agrees to consult, including council engagement with the community?
Oh, I'm not particularly fussed on.
Oh, okay, so that's your intention. Thank you. We have a seconder? Yes, thank you. All those who agree say aye.
Aye.
Those against, carried. Kia ora koutou. Thank you everyone for your contributions in today's meeting. We will follow on with a workshop after a cup of tea break and wharepaku break. But offline, kia ora koutou. Thank you.
So we're closing the meeting?